Welcome back to another session. I hope you were well. In today's session, I would like to talk about anxiety, emotions, and the role both play with regard to depression. Now, you have heard me say in the series of sessions that I have covered previously that our body functions in a way very analogous to most systems, most machines. And there is a cause effect relationship between how we feel, what we do, how we think, and who we are. I have covered previously why we have what one might call a deficit in our tank, which doesn't allow us to be prepared for life's events. In today's session, and therefore in the sessions for this week particularly, I want to talk about the emotional hole that we all tend to have and why that hole exists. But let me start with anxiety, because anxiety is something that most people can relate to at any level. Um, you've had the feeling as though you are anxious about something. It could be a test you're about to take, an interview, an exam, perhaps a call expected, uncertainty about the future, perhaps inadequacy with regards to whether you think you have the skills to meet the expectations, fear, worry. In any case, we have all, I have, I hope you have, and I hope if you have, you acknowledge that you've had that emotion, that uncertainty emotionally in yourself. Now, when I have had such experiences, it hasn't come because um, I was always looking forward to it. Sometimes it came because I was ill prepared. I have gone for interviews, I have gone out for important occasions, and because of how important the occasion was to me, I was nervous. I was slightly anxious. In other cases, I have been in places where there's been uncertainty, either traveling, um, there's been uncertainty with regards to security and safety. And if you have a family, for example, and if you are in that position where you are responsible for providing, there might be uncertainty and therefore anxiety about provision. So we've all felt that. It's a natural process. Let me start by saying as follows. Anxiety has in itself an evolutionary aspect to its purpose. It is an evolutionary tool, but it's energy draining. It's an energy sapping symptom. It drains you of energy. It's partly why you go through an experience. Sometimes for some people it's a car accident. It's maybe an intruder breaks in. For some other people, but it might just be an exam. It might be a test. It might be an email you receive from someone who's a supervisor or a boss asking you to meet with them. And it just drains you of all the energy you have. And you feel very tired, not just in the moment, but afterwards, and even subsequently for days, sometimes months, for years. Whenever you replay that experience, especially if it was a difficult experience, you find that it saps you of all the energy you have. Anxiety is an evolutionary tool. We have to understand why anxiety, back in the day, may have served the purpose, but today is acting more as a limitation to most people. I think it would be remiss of me not to explain a few concepts first before I go into today's session. Think about yourself, and this comes from some very wise people from the past. Dr. Truman Fleet was the one who pioneered this concept about how the mind and the body work. It's called a stick person. It's something you can find available out there. Generally speaking, there are two polar opposites in any sphere of life. Sometimes we call it positive and negative, or we call it yin and yang. In any case, if there is a cause-effect relationship between or in life, as a principle of life, we have to learn how that works. Anxiety is, in many ways, a symptom. It's not the cause. It's a symptom of something. It's an effect of something. So whenever you feel anxious, whenever you feel as though you're getting a little bit uneasy, you feel as though you are not at ease, think about the following. Something is causing you to feel the way you feel. How you feel is not the cause. There is an underlying cause for which you're experiencing the effect of that cause. I think this is key, because if you can conceptualize that process and recognize, I'm anxious, hang on. You being anxious, you are not the problem. There is something external. There is something internal. It could be a thought, external. It could be a person, an experience. It could even be part of your intellectual faculties, your memory. You're going back into your memory and you're replaying an event. Or you're going into your imagination and you're pre-playing a future. That is causing you to move into what we call a resonance, a state of vibration, an energy position that causes you to feel anxious. Generally speaking, the root cause of all anxiety is ignorance. Now, do not take this in the classical way that most people do whenever I make reference to this. I said to someone some time ago that all of human suffering stems from ignorance. It didn't land too well, but I said that because I believe it to be true. I also said that because I know in my experience, every time I have suffered, at the root of all of my suffering has been something that I was ignorant about. Ignorance is not knowing something. We are all ignorant. Being stupid is refusing to heed the lessons, to learn, to seek wisdom, and more importantly, even rejecting knowledge. That is being stupid. We are not all stupid, but we are all ignorant. There is something we do not know. And the more I've lived my life, the more I've realized that in proportionality terms, perhaps I know 4 or 5% and 95% of myself is ignorant. I've come to wrestle with that, and I've come to live with that, and I have accepted it. And therefore, I don't feel upset by the statement about ignorance. Ignorance is the cause, is the root cause of most of our suffering. I think of all of our suffering. Suffering that we know or we do not know about. You see, ignorance and the way it works with regards to anxiety, ignorance will lead to worry and doubt as you replay and process the information in your imagination or in your mind's eye. Ignorance leads to worry and doubt. Worry and doubt will manifest itself in a state we call fear. Fear is an internal experience, a feeling, but fear has to translate itself through the body. And when it manifests itself through the body, we give it a terminology. So we start with ignorance, we move to worry and doubt. Worry and doubt leads us to fear. Fear translates itself into the physical, away from the emotional and mental, into the physical, in what we call anxiety, a state of uncertainty, worry, nervousness, anxiousness in a poor way. Anxiety, for most people, think about this, and I know this from experience. When you get anxious, one of the things we do not do is we do not broadcast that to the world. We do not say to the world, "Lo, I am nervous." We tend to suppress our anxiety. In many ways, and I will get to this, as part of our evolutionary disposition. There was a reason we did that. We do not want to communicate to everyone that we are uncertain. And so we suppress our anxiety, suppressing our anxiety rather than expressing our anxiety. Think about this. When we are happy, when we feel in love, when we feel enthusiastic and excited about life and new things come, we express that to the world. We walk around, we sing, and people say, "Well, she's got a spring on her step. He's got a walk to him. He's got a funny gait. He seems confident." Why? We are broadcasting, we are expressing what we think is something positive. But when we feel anxious and when we have anxiety, we suppress it. When we suppress anxiety, there are only 3 things or 3 stages that follow. The first, anxiety suppressed, will lead us to a place where we feel depressed. Depression is a result of suppressed anxiety, primarily. Yes, there is depression clinically, but on the emotional side, which is what we are talking about in today's session, depression comes by virtue of suppressed anxiety. We suppress our anxiety, we go into depression, and it causes us to be in a state where we don't feel at ease. We call that disease, which is why people then start getting medication. If we continue in that process, if that loop carries on, it leads to disintegration for some people, and for some very small minority of people, death. The pain becomes too much and they decide to take their lives. The pain becomes unbearable, they decide to do things that are drastic. And sometimes it's a slow death, drinking, alcohol, drugs, social events that go to the extreme. And for some other people, it's an immediate decision. For some people, we slowly die, not really manifesting or getting to our true potential. The point being, it all started with ignorance. Ignorance led to worry and doubt. Worry and doubt was manifested in a state we call fear internally. Fear is expressed through the body in what we call anxiety. Anxiety we do not express because we feel from an evolutionary perspective that it's not to our advantage to express that, so we suppress it. We suppress our anxiety, it leads to depression. Depression makes us unease. We're never at peace, we're never happy, we're never contented. When we go into a state of disease, we move into disintegration and we go into death. Now, why have I explained all of that? I've explained all of that to simply connect you with the cause effect. Now, there is on the opposite side things that you can do to alleviate that position that you might start with, that cause. The opposite of ignorance is knowledge. Knowledge begins as a seed. We talk about knowledge, wisdom, understanding. Knowledge leads to understanding, hence the great writers say, in all of your getting, get understanding. The great writer says wisdom is the principal thing. But in all of your getting, get understanding. If it costs you everything, get understanding. You see, when we seek information, we can gather knowledge. That's the process that flows. We seek information, we can gather knowledge. When we gather knowledge, we consume that knowledge, we might have some level of understanding which comes from comprehension. You have to comprehend what you're being, or what you're acquiring, what you're being exposed to. If you comprehend it, you understand. Now, you can have knowledge by virtue of information. You can have understanding by virtue of you comprehending the information. But you might lack the final, which is wisdom, which comes from application. Course correction. Progress plus pain leads us to a place where we introspect. Do that long enough, we move into a state where we start to learn. Wisdom, therefore, is the key, the application side of things. So we start with information or knowledge, we gain understanding. So rather than have ignorance that leads to worry and doubt, we have understanding, which comes from study. What you are doing now is you are studying. You're listening to someone who you do not know explain a concept that perhaps you believe you understand in a manner different based on your experience, but also someone who perhaps does not use the right words and perhaps is saying things very poorly. But by listening, you're gathering more information. The hope is that perhaps there's some understanding you gain from the process, which leads you down the path that rather than have fear, remember, ignorance leads to worry and doubt, which manifests itself in fear, an emotional state. If you replace ignorance with study and knowledge and information, you get understanding. Understanding leads to faith. It's why the great writer Paul said, in all you're getting, get understanding. Study. He says faith comes, but also faith leaves. Fear comes, but also fear leaves. Faith comes by what you hear. Faith leaves by what you hear. Fear comes by what you hear. Fear leaves by what you hear. There is always a third voice. And the key thing is in your anxiety state and your worry and unhappiness, always look out for the third voice. The third voice is not always someone external to you. Sometimes it's the voice in yourself. The still small voice in you that has been conditioned to tell you lies about what is possible and tell you limitations and remind you of your poor mistakes and tell you that you will amount to nothing, and therefore you repeat and you believe what you hear. But faith comes and faith goes. You see, many of you might be thinking, I don't believe in this faith BS. Well, I understand that. There is a saying that to him who, or to her who has no faith, no proof will be sufficient. Whereas to those who have faith or belief, any proof might make it work, might help. To those who believe, no proof is required. To those who do not, no proof will be sufficient. In dealing with anxiety, I am asking you to think about a concept, proofs that exist as a concept, and to trust, to believe, and to move forward in that position, hoping that eventually it will click. You can't connect the dots looking backwards. You can only connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect the dots looking backwards. So there is an element of trust and belief and hope that everybody must have, that you can overcome a difficult phase that you find yourself, and that you will find light. So we start with knowledge. We understand that knowledge and information leads to understanding. That creates faith. Faith being the opposite of fear. Now, fear manifests itself in anxiety. Faith manifests itself in the body as well-being, which is why when you see people who have a sense of belief and faith and hope, they are very relaxed. If you have anxiety and you suppress it, which is what most people do, it leads to a state where you feel at ease, as though you're not at ease. You're opposite of being at ease. You are in a state of disease. Whereas if you have faith and you feel at peace, at ease, when people have faith, what they do is they express how they feel. They don't suppress it. They express it, and that leads to a state of being relaxed. You're at ease. It leads to a state of being in a positive mind frame, state of well-being rather than unwell. Well-being and life, abundance, prosperity, and happiness. The key part of everything I shared with you goes back to the top. Ignorance, opposite, knowledge, and understanding. What you are doing now is gathering new information that might help you. Now, having explained that whole concept of how the body and the mind works together, there is a cause effect. When I feel happy, I'm not surprised that I am happy. I am happy as a result of things that I have done, thoughts that I have kept, feelings that I have been happy to entertain, and a lifestyle. We know that emotion comes from motion. We also know that motion is a result of emotion. There are things we can do, cause-effect relationships. So just keep that in mind. When you feel anxious, don't get angry with yourself. Don't beat yourself up. Don't feel as though there's nothing good about you. Just recognize there's a cause-effect relationship. Focus on the cause. Things are happening to you by virtue of a cause. If you change the cause, you change the effect. Now, I started by saying that anxiety was an evolutionary tool. It is. That's correct. In historical times, we needed to be vigilant. If we had too little vigilance, danger moved in. We found ourselves in precarious positions. Sometimes it was death, destruction, and horrible suffering. We had to be vigilant because we had issues with food supply. We had issues with the elements, cold, and the seasons, which we always contended with. We had issues with predators, people and things, animals, trying to perhaps live off our flesh. We also had issues with regards to wars as time progressed. That tribe and tribe A is looking for more food, and they've seen tribe B and they decide to invade and kill everybody there and take all their food and their shelter and their clothes. We contended with these things. It was simply the survival of the fittest. That was primitive, it wasn't fun, but it was the truth. Now, if you go back in time, and I cannot apply this process because I think it's slightly unfair, I have been outstanded by what I have learned with regards to understanding historical times. And I'm going to use something that perhaps gives you, it's an analogy, it's not a very, very, very accurate analogy, but I think it serves a purpose. Abraham Maslow talks about his hierarchy of needs, and at the bottom of the needs is your physiological needs, and then you move into your psychological needs, and you move into health and well-being, and you move up to other things such as self-esteem and self-actualization. At the bottom is what I just described: security, food, water, safety. Very basic. Once you've sorted that out, you move up to the next level, which is where you start talking about ideas and emotions and empathy and self-esteem and self-expression. And hopefully you get to a place of self-actualization. Primitive man stayed in the bottom of the barrel, focused on security and food and safety for most of his and her lives. We also have modern men and modern women today. So as you watch this, you are in the modern category. And therefore, we've already achieved the bottom by virtue of standing on the shoulders of the people who came before us. And therefore, we don't suffer the same because we don't have the same fate that they had back in the day. Now, as a result of that, what we find is that our struggles with regards to anxiety are not consistent with what primitive men and women went through. For us, it's financial, it's emotional, it's our network. That is our suffering. The survival of the fittest, therefore, comes in those areas: finances, emotional, juice, network, and more. You see, back in the day, if you had too much vigilance, and this applies to today even, if you had too much vigilance, it guaranteed your survival. You had a small tribe of people and you all could not sleep at the same time. One person had to stand watch. And then at certain times of the night, there was a switchover because you couldn't put all the burden on one person. People stood in their posts to protect and alert those in the small tribe about invaders, about things that didn't seem right. You ring the bell loud enough and everybody wakes up. And you would have rotations to make sure that people were not overburdened with exposure to nature. Someone stayed for 4 hours and then there was a swap, and another person, another swap. And therefore, we took turns. Too much vigilance ensured survival. Unfortunately, since we've solved the whole issue about survival and primarily security and our basic needs, in the West today, for modern man and woman, too much vigilance means we waste energy. It also means we avoid taking risks or taking opportunities that present controlled risks. It means that we risk isolation. We risk spending time with people, being exposed to new ideas. For some people, it's even as trivial as, socially awkward. You avoid eye contact. You avoid interactions with people where you might be asked questions, or you might have to look at someone in the eye. And for such people, you find the extreme. They move to the other side, which is where they become more OCD. They take to cleaning, checking things properly, double check the door, locking the door a few times in the night. We have rituals that we've developed, which is partly because of that spiral of anxiety we have, and because we are still too vigilant, but in a modern way. And as a result of that, what we find is we're illogical. We are spending energy in a wasteful way. We are sapping all the energy that we have. Why? Because we perceive that there is a risk, there is a threat. It's not real, it's a perception. But we believe that danger exists. Now, least you think I'm postulating that something is wrong about what you were doing. Let me say this so you can understand that I understand the struggles. The threat perceived can be more powerful than a threat performed. And let me say this again. The threat perceived can be more dangerous to an individual than a threat performed. For example, you're walking down the street and someone bumps into you and punches you. It's an attack, it's an assault. You've had the experience. You might contend with that experience afterwards, but If you received a notification from someone locally and you were told that man over there has made a threat, and let's just assume you're much smaller and you can't fight, and it's someone who is a bully has made a threat that the next time they see you on the street, they're going to bump into you and punch you and break your teeth. Let's assume you don't have any skills and knowledge about martial arts and you can't fight. And this person is a strong, trained fighter. Every day, you have to live with that thought. You're replaying that thought in your mind over and over again prior to the encounter. You don't know when the encounter will be. So you walk out the door and you think it's today. And you come back, it wasn't that day. And what you find is your body is just releasing adrenals and dopamine, cortisol, in a manner that is not healthy. And eventually, the event happens. So you've suffered in two ways. Sometimes you over-exaggerate what the event might even be because you don't know what it will be. And then when it occurs, you realize that the imagined experience was even far worse than the real experience. We go back to this whole saying, sticks and stones might break my bone, but words will never hurt me. In this instance, I am saying there are occasions when a threat perceived can be more painful than the threat actually experienced or performed. So there's a logical and also an illogical aspect of people being anxious or people believing that they have to be more vigilant and going through this ritualistic approach that we have to life. I understand that. And all I'm simply saying is cause effect. I'm not trying to rationalize whether you're right in making that or choosing that pathway. My role here is to simply say, if your way isn't working, and if you've suffered long enough, perhaps try a different way. And that way begins by letting go. Yes, in the old times, it was important to be vigilant for survival. But for some reason, these days, in modern time, part of our anxiety comes by virtue of not security or safety, but comes from financial concerns. We're worried about where we're going to find the bacon from and whether we might be able to bring home the bacon. It's not about food. It's not about cold. It's not about people who are predators and people who are thieves. It's more that we actually have a void in our lives. We have a tribal association, and in historic terms, the tribal associations was connected to a small community. For example, this man here is a blacksmith and he's good, and the other man there is a farmer and he's very good at his job, and the other man there is a baker, and everybody came together and you formed part of a unit. The blacksmith did not have to worry about how he could bake and how he could farm and get the crop. He simply applied what we now call David Ricardo's process of specialization and division of labor. And that created a need to worry less. And by virtue of worrying less, we live more abundantly because we realized the concept we call exchange. I can come to you and give you what I have, and you can give me what you have. Those who suffer from anxiety, generally speaking, do not see life in this way. So they tend to believe that they cannot share what they are concerned about, and they cannot offer to another person something in exchange. And therefore, they become insular. So what we then have is in modern times, a lot of our suffering with regards to anxiety is by virtue of our ignorance, but also by virtue of our refusal to give. And let me clarify this as I bring today's session to a close. In talking about our inability to give, I'm not saying to give something, but also I'm talking about the inability to gift other people the joy of giving to you. Some of us who are anxious and worried and depressed, we rob other people of the opportunity to pour into our lives. Let's assume you are a cup and the cup is empty and you feel as though you have nothing to give. Well, then present yourself so that we can fill you up with water, and we can wash you with the word, and we can fill you up with wine should you choose. Depression and anxiety masks themselves both at something that you should endure alone. Let me express something to you as I close. Every time I felt anxious, for whatever reason, I have found sharing how I feel or my thoughts with someone else allowed me to play out the role, or have an interview to, I'm not really sure. Okay, can I sit with you? Yeah, you're anxious. Yes, I feel a bit anxious. I really want this interview to go well. Okay, let's role play. Why don't I ask you questions about the interview, and you push back, and you just perform as though you are at the interview. Role play, and I would find that by someone extending that hand, that I would start to express how I would act in the interview, and in doing so, I felt more at ease. I was explaining what I was going to say, and the person would push back, and I was practicing. In other words, I was gaining more knowledge, more information. That information was leading to a better understanding. That understanding was creating faith. It kept me at ease. I was therefore able to express myself, and I had life in abundance. And sometimes the practice was so good, repeated multiple times, and I went into the interview and it felt much easier. I was surprised at how much worry I had prior to the interview. Well, in many ways, you see, someone gifted me the gift of a listening ear, and I did not rob them of the opportunity to give me that gift. So I will end today's session by saying as follows. If you feel anxious, if you feel as though you're suffering from any form of anxiety, constant or reoccurring, or perhaps non-progressive, or perhaps comes and goes, you've got to learn how to talk. You've got to learn how to put yourself amongst people, and you have to allow people to pour into you. Let them gift you the gift of listening, the gift of their experiences, the gift of helping you piece together this puzzle of life, the gift of helping you get to the root cause and make changes. Now, I hope today's session has been useful. In the sessions to follow, since we are still on the same week, I'm going to expand on this whole thing about anxiety. I think there are a few more things that I could say that I believe will be of some value.